All right. Couple minutes after the hour, I'll go ahead and kick things off. Um, for those of you that joined the first session of QP2U, thank you for returning. And if this is your first QP2U session, welcome. My name is Ryan Karapis, Marketing Director here at QualiPro, and we're glad to have all of you. And so, on behalf of QualiPro and our partners at Bloom Golf Partners, Tyler Bloom, as well as our fantastic panelists here today, Mike, Greg, and Andrew, and of course our moderator Jeff. We're just thrilled to have you guys, and we had really good engagement and participation at our first session. So we look forward to hopefully these sessions continuing to grow. And so I guess just from a housekeeping perspective, one thing that I request is please, throughout the entire webinar, feel free to type any questions you have in the chat. And then at the end, we will host a Q&A, and I can field those questions, and we'll be sure to stay on and make sure that all of your questions are answered. And so, again, just thank you for your participation and engagement. And with that being said, I'll hand it over to Jeff to kick things off with our panelists.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, just a big thank you to QualiPro for hosting this and providing this forum for us to have these discussions. And for the audience out there today, we feel like we have a really good panel, and we're going to talk about construction planning and management. It's a huge topic, and we're going to hit on a lot of the points that we feel like that are highlights. But the first thing, would like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Mike McCormick, why don't we start with you, and we'll kind of go from there.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm Mike McCormick, ground superintendent at Oakmont Country Club. Grew up outside Boston. Started working on a golf course when I was 11 years old. Went to UMass for 4 years. While I was at UMass, I interned at the International and worked at Oak Hill for Jeff, and did my last internship at Oakmont. Graduated from UMass, came back here, was here through the 16 Open. Got my first super job at the Appowamus Club in Rye, New York. Moved up there for 6 years, did a couple of projects while I was at Appowamus, and then returned to Oakmont just over 3 years ago. So that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Greg Hufner, how about you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Hufner. I've been in the golf course business for 30 plus years. First 14 years in the business, I was a golf course superintendent and an assistant. Graduated from University of Massachusetts with a turf grass degree. Spent my early part of my career in New Jersey as an assistant at Pine Valley Golf Club. Did a couple of internships at a couple top 100 clubs, and was a superintendent right outside of Philadelphia for 8 years before getting into the construction business 16 years ago. So I have a background as, a grass grower and a construction guy.
That's awesome. Thanks, Greg. Andrew Green.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me, Jeff. Yeah, Andrew Green, president and principal architect of AH Green Design. Started in golf course maintenance many moons ago. Got a degree in turf grass management and a degree in landscape architecture from Virginia Tech. Spent 10 years building golf courses with McDonald and Sons out of Maryland, and then formed my firm in 2014. And just, yeah, having fun playing in the dirt these days.
You got it. Well, appreciate it. Again, thank you guys for being here. We'll kind of hop right into this and just kind of like, you want to start off with a general question, maybe Andrew and Greg, and Andrew, you can start off, but like, what's the temperature of the golf course construction market today? Like, what are we looking at? I know it's crazy, but I'd love to hear it from both your guys' perspectives.
Yeah, it's something else. Certainly we saw a bounce from the Tiger boom back in the early 2000s, but post-COVID, I think we've really seen this kind of meaningful growth in the game where it's not a flash in the pan. Most of the people that are coming to the game of golf have a real connection to it. This idea of being outside, being connected to something that's very self-dependent. You rely on your own game to play, but then also like this unlimited amount of camaraderie. And it's a great game to play no matter how old you are. So with that, the golf renovation world and even golf new construction world is just, yeah, it's going nuts. I think the biggest message with that is just, having this conversation about detailed planning just seems so important, because for us, we're planning things 2, 3, 4, 5 years out already. I'm sure, Greg, you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, we were fortunate where we were fairly busy, actually really busy before COVID hit. And once COVID hit, it was almost like golf course construction on steroids. Um, we're fortunate where, we're booked 2, 3 years out at this point. And, we don't take on more work than we can do. And we actually take on a little bit less work so that if we get into situations where we run into some issues with weather or what have you, that we can end up having extra horsepower and manpower. But the industry in itself, like Andrew said, is they're planning a couple of years out to get all that done. But you still get the guys that come last minute and try to get, hey, you have an extra spot here and there. We still always like to keep spots available for our existing customers, guys that have worked with us over the years. But it's becoming more and more where you have to plan 2, 3 years out, if not longer.
Yeah, and I think that's just a really good message for maybe some listeners that are out there that are contemplating future work, things of that nature. And I see it in my side of the business is that, you know, 2, 3, 4 years out, and that factors in so many ways, right? Whether it's material pricing, cost, and adding costs that are gonna, you know, compensate for inflationary aspects. And we'll get into that a little bit further down the road, but just wanted to get your guys' initial take on that. So let's set the table. Hey, um, you want to do some type of renovation, construction project, and we won't get into like new construction, but we're just talking about going into an existing golf course and doing work. Mike, you know, selecting the team, and we have
Mhm.
three different perspectives: contractor, architect, and golf course superintendent. Like when you guys get to that point of when you're thinking about doing a project, team selection, how important is it? And like what thoughts do you brings them, or what thoughts does that bring to mind for you?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jeff. I think just like you just touched on, the fact that you have to be planning these things years in advance, really kind of key into that. And um, I think any project I've ever worked on, the architect is always kind of in place. Um, in my experience, that's always been a decision that's really driven by club leadership. And I think I've had some level of impact on that, but typically that's a club decision. And then they've always kind of turned to, myself as a superintendent to kind of take the reins from there and kind of work through, okay, like we need to bid this out a few different ways. What are the companies that are going to be able to perform to the level that we're seeking, that are going to provide the economic side, and you work through that process, and then you kind of dial in, okay, like this is our preferred contractor, and then you work through the negotiating phase, and you get to the right number that is good for all parties, and then there's another step after that. It's like for us at Oakmont, like we've worked with Total Turf on a few different occasions at this point, but then it becomes like, okay, like what team are we getting and who's the foreman going to be? And, we've been really fortunate at Oakmont. We've had a few different foremen from Total Turf and they've all been great, but they all bring a little something different to the table. And, looking back now on my experience working with Total Turf, like if we were doing greens work, like I would want one team. If we were doing bunker work, maybe it's another team. So I think the more intimately you can get to know like these teams, who's running them, who you're going to be working with day in and day out. And a lot of times I think it's as simple as picking up the phone and calling other superintendents that have worked with these teams and really trying to identify like who might be the best fit for your club.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Andrew, I mean, obviously we worked together in the past, but like team selection, I know you've had a lot of experience with that, like how critical is it from your perspective to make sure that the team is cohesive going in before, the dirt even starts being moved, making sure that everybody's cohesive.
Yeah, I think unlike any other construction project in the world, golf construction really is team based. It's the superintendent, it's their assistants, it's their second assistants, it's AITs, it's foremen, it's
Yeah.
everybody on their team working together and then assembling the pieces that have to attach to it. Certainly, irrigation designer is a huge thing that we're looking at as part of that team selection. I always, tell superintendents to make sure they talk to, if they want to talk to numerous different irrigation designers, see who they feel best fits with kind of their style or what they're looking for. So that's a huge thing. If the project involves moving any amount of dirt, having a civil engineer on board that knows the local rules and regulations that can help guide you through the process, that's a huge thing. And then, grass selection, whether it be an agronomist, the differing turf farms, trying to make sure you're securing the turf that is best for your situation and what you're looking for. Heck, even seed, in this day and age, even securing seed can be kind of tough. So having that piece as part of the team. Um, and then, from the architecture perspective, we see all different ways of how we become involved. Certainly, as Mike said, through club leadership, but also we see, these consulting relationships. We're working hand in hand with superintendents, trying to paint a picture of how to address their needs. The last thing I'd say on that is we really believe strongly that the internal team at a golf course really needs to have some good structure as well. The superintendent's only one person, and there's a lot going on in these construction projects. So building your team ahead of time with assistance and horsepower that can help tow the rope with you is huge. Because for us, we'd like to have a foreman or an assistant in charge of irrigation, a foreman or an assistant in charge of construction, and a foreman or an assistant in charge of grow in. And so that at least you're kind of delegating some of those responsibilities, even as the point guard or quarterback, the superintendent that has the main command, having those branches out. It's a huge deal for success in our
Yeah,
eyes.
I think you bring up a couple really, really good points. Is one is that internal team is mission critical, right? In execution and like when we get into like the post-construction phase growing in and you got different stages of grass establishment, but like you take that ring and go outside another group is like that core group of individuals, even like testing laboratories, material providers, it becomes this huge scope that one person can't accomplish themselves. But I think you make a good point. It goes beyond like the three representative industries that you guys represent. It goes out much further than that and making sure that you're dealing with the right people. I think that's good. So I mean it kind of segues really good into like pre-project planning, right? Greg, I was gonna hit on you, like what do you think, from a contractor standpoint, like what are the important aspects as far as like the pre-planning phase of a project?
Yeah, I mean, just like we mentioned that guys have to bid out projects, 2, 3 years in advance. You need to be planning projects at least that far in advance. I mean, um, depending upon the size and scope of the project that you're planning on doing, and where you are at in the world or the country, there could be a couple regulatory bodies that, might not be the easiest in the world to navigate. And as much as you need a team like Andrew and Mike and a good contractor, you also need a team on the other end, whereas Andrew mentioned engineers. You know, you can really help a project or you can really hurt a project by selecting the right engineer. I mean, we do a lot of work down in Florida, and there's one engineering firm and a guy that could get anything permitted in Palm Beach County
Mhm.
because he's dealt with all the golf courses and he knows what to say, what not to say, who to talk to, how to present it in a way where it doesn't raise any red flags. But you go and you hire a national engineering firm, and I won't mention any names, and they just put something on a piece of paper and they submit it to Palm Beach County or one of the other counties that deals with a lot or doesn't deal with a lot of golf courses, and it's going to be stuck in red tape for months. So it really you need to do your homework on a lot of that stuff prior to the start of any project, and it's just as important to hire those guys on the front end and get your ducks in a row than it is to hire. That should be one of your things when you hire an architect. It should be an architect and an engineer, and those guys got to work together, put the plans together. As much as Andrew's drawing a plan, the engineer needs to have that plan to be able to go to any of the permitting districts and be able to submit that and get that approved. Um, so that's one of those things, and you need to hire the right people in advance. That's got to be done well in advance.
Sure.
And I see a lot of guys that
Sorry, Greg.
that's an afterthought.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really good point. And, one aspect that I might have like kind of skipped over, but I think it's also an important part to mention. And, Andrew and Mike, I know you guys both have had critical parts on this. And Andrew, why don't you start off? But like, when you're embarking upon these renovation projects, is that somebody has to pay for it. You might have a membership or an owner, and you need to sell those individuals on a project. A lot of these at, private clubs go up for votes, and, those are some pretty stressful times when you're trying to get this project sold. I'd love to hear your perspective and how you really approach selling a project to get a board of governors, whether or a membership to sign off on this. Let's face it, construction's not cheap these days either. So, like how do you sell it?
Yeah, and I think, just following up on what Greg said, that permitting piece, it's kind of like two parallel trains. You kind
Hmm.
of need the permitting piece running parallel to any political decision or approval, because some of these permitting things are a 2 year lead time. So don't shortchange that. As far as the political thing and selling a project, I always feel like the number one thing a superintendent can do to benefit themselves and a potential project is to communicate the challenges that they're facing on a daily basis. And so that when you go before a membership, ownership, whatever, and you're presenting this potential project, that people already understand, hey, okay, this is addressing, the bunkers washing out every time you get a quarter inch of rain, or, the amount of labor it takes to, I don't know, plucking contaminated grass out of the greens, or dealing with putting surfaces that are sealed off. Anything you can start to layer on and communicate allows a group of people to understand where this is coming from. And there's a chart that all the allied associations put together about the lifespans of the different components. I always tell superintendents, get that chart, fill out your years of where things are, and don't oversell it. Don't go, shoving it down their throat that, hey, our bunker sand's 10 years old and this says 7. We got to replace it now. No, no, it's that, hey, we've gotten a good life out of this bunker sand. Now we need to be thinking about the next step. So, as much as you can do to communicate that ahead of time, it just sets the stage for when someone like me comes in and says, hey, we've got these things we've got to deal with. This is our vision.
Yeah, and I think that you've always done a good job with it too. Like when I've been participating with you, and there's other architects I've been in meetings with, is that there's the component of like those metrics that you just talked about that like you can measure pictures say 1,000 words, right? If you're grabbing pictures of stuff while you're out there, but like there's also the excitement of these guys want to play a new facet of their golf course or play their golf course in a different way. So I mean, I think that's interesting, and kudos to you because I think you do a really good job on selling. But Mike, what about from your perspective when
Yeah.
you're selling projects?
So I think Andrew hit on a couple really key points there, but in my experience, there's always like one sole like impetus for a project, right? Like when I was at Apple Almas, they hadn't done a golf course improvement project for 20 years, right? And every other club in the Met had done one in the last 5 to 10 years. So that was like strictly a time thing, like keeping up with the times, keeping up with your competition. That was a driving factor there. At Oakmont, the impetus was the bunkers had met their lifespan, just like Andrew said, they were 20 years old. And we knew that we had to rebuild the bunkers prior to the 2025 championship. And I think through both those processes, like putting together documents like, associated agronomic programs, like what's your return on investment going to be? How is the golf course going to play differently? Like, every club on earth wants firm, fast conditions. Well, if you do a master renovation program and you replace drainage and you rebuild your greens, like those are tangible things you can sell. And then I think, like Andrew said, it's really easy to, another return on investment is oftentimes these projects is labor savings. It's not always that way. A lot of times you do these projects and you end up, like for us at Oakmont, we rebuilt all our bunkers with liners. We had never had those before. So like we cut our time in fixing washouts and removing contamination. We cut that down to probably like 10-20% of what it used to be. But, our bunkers, the way they're shaped now, we put a lot more time into like fly mowing. So it goes both ways. But obviously when I'm selling a project, I focus on the savings, not the potential like other side of the spectrum. And I think one thing that I think about a lot, I've never worked directly with Andrew, but every architect I've ever worked with, the really good ones, have this uncanny ability to stand in front of a membership and sell a vision. And I just don't think like as superintendents, we're qualified to do that to the same degree. And I remember like going into the project at Oakmont 2023 restoration, there was a lot of apprehension about this. And it went from being a bunker project to this master plan. We were touching all the greens and green expansions and changing fairway grassing lines and tees and irrigation. And like Gil got up in front of the membership and like everyone from went from being super apprehensive to walking out of the room and being like, "Oh my God, like this is a no-brainer." And I've seen like Andrew, like I've seen some like the visuals he'll do where he'll take a hole and like draw like this is what it's going to look like after I'm done. And it's like any member on earth would look at that and be like, "Oh my God, like we have to do this." And then you sell the financial aspect um the right way. And like my goal has always been like, and you touched on it, Jeff, like you don't want to sell it so much. You want to get to a point where like it's the membership's idea and they're the ones pushing for it. And when it's their idea, usually the outcome is pretty good and these things just grow and snowball.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, picking up on that,
Mhm.
finding a person that helps champion it besides the senior staff, the
Yeah.
superintendent, the golf professional, the GM, they can all want it, but without people internal within that group, whether it be ownership or membership, helping propel it forward, you're really going to struggle. So find
Yeah.
a champion that you can share.
Yeah. And
And I
I
think
think
the
that,
other interesting thing that like membership, they get used to the golf course they play, right? Like at Oakmont, like the greens had never been touched. And just like every other golf course on earth, like the perimeters of the greens evolve over years. And like you get someone like yourself or Gil, and they take the membership out and you walk on the greens, you're like, look, guys, like all these greens have become bowls. And like look at the dimensions of the greens and the original footprints. And all of a sudden, again, people walk away and they're like, man, I had no idea how much these greens had changed over generations. And
yeah.
yeah,
I will
things.
say too is that it's the selling part's overlooked sometimes, and Andrew, when we worked together at Oak Hill, I think we actually probably spent more time on that aspect, selling the project and getting it improved than we did on certain other aspects of the pre-planning phase. Um,
Yeah,
Segueing in, like there's a whole nother set of pre-planning, right? You're talking about specifications, material selection, which is a huge important aspect in making sure that that's correct. But I mean, Greg, I mean, from your perspective, like if you don't mind commenting a little bit on the importance of having, good specifications, identifying scope and understanding what scope looks like, from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the spec is like the Bible for construction. I mean, as a contractor, we're going through that thing and that's how we're preparing our pricing or our bid. So Andrew puts together some, pretty thorough specs. And having worked with him a bunch, we understand what his expectations are and what he wants. But um, if you're going to go, put together a project and put it out to bid from contractors, you need to know what is in the spec and what your expectations are, and you need to, um, you know, make it very clear. If you want certain materials, you need to spec them out. If you want a certain vendor, you need to spec it out. You want a certain mix or sand or bunker liner. You need to be very specific. Because if you're not, number one, you're not going to be able to, compare pricing or proposals very easily. Number two, you might get somebody that, bids different stuff. And, it's much easier to be clear from the beginning. And as a superintendent or, someone that manages a golf course, you're going to want a hand in all of that. Yeah, there are certain architects and designers that like certain, bunker liners or, ways of doing things or components of golf course construction. But at the end of the day, you're the one that's left managing the golf course when we leave. So, if you feel pretty strongly about a bunker sand and or a mix, I mean, you should have, you know, um, some say in what you're going to manage when we leave. Um, the one thing I tell all of our customers when you get into certain things is there's a lot of subjective things when it comes to building bunkers, bunker sands, who likes what, who doesn't like what. When you get into some of the pre-planning stuff we talked about earlier, is don't hesitate to build a couple test bunkers way in advance and put a couple sands out there and let the members pick it. Because the last thing you want to do is pick the wrong bunker sand and have 3, 4 acres of bunkers that they all complain about the sand's bad. You know, give them the best options you can and then let them pick it. So when if they don't like it, it's all on them. So there's a lot of things like that that come into play in a project that, you as a superintendent or an assistant need to be involved in well in advance. And I think
Yeah.
Andrew will agree. I mean, he probably gets inputs from guys all the time as far as what they want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the first things I do is send our standard spec book to the superintendent. Say, hey, read this through, mark it up with the red pen. Anything you feel strongly about, we'll make a note. We'll have a discussion and land in the best spot for sure. And Greg hit a nail on the head. The tighter you are with your specifications, the better the construction process, the cleaner and more consistent your construction product will be. And for sure, in the planning stages, the better it'll be to compare multiple prices across everything from grass to contractor, irrigation, the whole way.
Yeah. Mike, from your standpoint, golf course superintendent, how do you approach, like let's say you're working with an architect, they're landing their specifications on your desk. And then, obviously I think from our particular standpoint, material selection becomes a huge aspect of whatever potential construction project. How do you approach that?
I think I think like Andrew said, I think any architect I've ever worked with, they have their kind of generic spec book, and everyone's always been very flexible to making sure those specs meet the expectations of myself as a superintendent, of the micro and macro climates that might exist on a specific golf course. But Jeff, like when it comes to specs, right? I think those are such critical decisions, like the mix you're using for your greens, the gravel, like turf selection. That doesn't apply quite as much to like the projects I've done, but you're building a brand new bent grass greens, you're down south, all these different warm season options. Like those are such critical things. And I think my only take there is like I've seen a lot of guys fall into the trap of like, this is my thing. I'm going to make all these decisions in a silo. And my take there is like, if I'm picking a mix for my greens, like I'm reaching out to 20 or 30 people that are way smarter than I am, being like, here's what I'm thinking. Try to poke holes in this. And I want a lot of smart people that are way more technically proficient than I am telling me like, yeah, you're on the right track. I would tweak this, adjust that. And then like Greg said, like there's certain things that as a superintendent, I don't want any part in making the decision. Like and bunker sand is like number one on that list. Like I might come out with like three bunker sands that I think like from a physical analysis standpoint are going to perform the way we want. And then whether you're building test bunkers on your property or you're getting members in a car, your leadership, your stakeholders at a club and driving them to other golf courses and letting them hit out of those bunkers, like I want them making that decision all day, every day.
Yeah, it's
Because
gonna
at
be
the end of
great.
the day, like bunker, like if you pick the right greens mix and the greens perform well, the turf is healthy, the playability is right, like no one's ever going to question that. In a million years, you're never going to get 100% of the membership happy with like what bunkers saying you chose.
Yeah.
And I imagine the same holds true for like warm season grass selection, perhaps bent grass. So getting
Yeah,
them
the
out
one
and about.
Can I add one thing there on the bunker selection? I absolutely agree. I'm big on making sure that whatever stands the folks are going to decide on, that I'm on board with them. Right.
Yeah.
So, like you said, Mike, like make sure they fit in whatever parameters you're looking for. And then don't forget that bunker sand acts differently as a ball is hit into it versus raking it and playing a golf shot out of it. So I
Mm.
really recommend putting that test sand on like a short par three or maybe a shorter four where you're getting some high lofted clubs that land in the sand. Because I can't tell you how often I've had clubs make a decision on a sand just because it's been in a practice bunker that they've raked and dropped balls and hit shots out of. And
Yeah.
then you
Yep.
get it out on the golf course and you got fried eggs or other issues that were unforeseen because you were testing it in an ideal circumstance.
yeah.
And I think like bunker liners, there's all these different options out there, right? And I've seen scenarios where a bunker liner might have a certain spec for like how many inches of sand you're putting in the bunker compacted to a certain depth. And even though that's their spec, it might not like be the best solution for your environment. So again, that's why I want to pick up the phone. I want to call 10 guys that have that bunker liner who have had it in place for, at least a few years. And I want to hear all the pros and cons. Because the reality is there's pros and cons to every different solution.
Yeah, from that standpoint, I mean, Greg, like when you're in this pre-planning standpoint, contractor, what do you think are the most important design and construction details, to clarify prior to breaking ground?
Other than, the one thing I'll add to these guys is,
Mhm.
when you're looking at, some of those, you know, material things. I mean, you see a lot of guys, especially down south, when you have these new grass type and varieties come out. A lot of these guys are experimenting with them years in advance. Especially in areas where there's shade. There's always a new Bermuda grass coming out. It seems like, and they'll put them in some of the worst environments out there, and they'll just see if they can grow them, whether it's a shade or wet area or stuff like that. Um, so I just think, you got to do your due diligence. You got to do your homework. Like Mike said, if you don't know, ask questions. I mean, there's tons of resources out there for you guys. Whether it's the architect, whether it's your peers, whether it's taking educational classes through the GCSAA as far as construction or the Golf Course Builders Association. If you don't know, you can find the answers. And like Mike said, there's if you haven't done it, there's people down the street that have. I think just educating yourself as much as possible, and don't just pick it because the guy down the street picked it. Because at the end of the day, it might not be the right bunker sand, it might not be the right mix, it might not be the right grass for your situation. I think a lot of times, you know, club members get caught up with, oh, they grassed the golf course down the street with this, and I love playing off it because it helped my game. And unfortunately, that doesn't work for every golf course. And I think, you get a lot of pressure. Whereas I played down the street or I played so and so and it was in perfect shape. Why isn't our place like that? Where they got this grass. I just think you gotta it's tough. I've been there before, and you got to do what's best for your club. And I think it's, the more you can educate yourself and the more you can educate your members and, show them that you're trying, show them, hey, I tried this grass, it didn't work here. Um, Prior to any type of project will be a huge benefit for yourself.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add to that too is that like if you're thinking about a large scale renovation slash construction project, if you have the means to be able to do it, travel and go see some other stuff. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Get out there, take a look at, from an architecture standpoint, pick people's brain, pick up the phone. I think that, that's the overwhelming theme is make sure you guys are talking, communicating people. But let's kind of segue now into, like, okay, once a project start, we talk about building a team, but Andrew, obviously you've had between you and Greg a, a plethora of experience in construction. Like if you had to peg it, role, superintendent, architect, contractor. I mean, like obviously you want it to be fluid, but like if you had to take a stab at what that looks like in a successful construction project, what do you think that looks like?
Yeah, the best projects are one complete team. We each have our own responsibilities, but we are working as one defined unit and we're working to a goal. I think a few things to think about there is understanding the sequence of construction that everybody can get behind. You can work that out in advance, but you need to know where you're starting, where you're ending, and how you're getting from point A to point B. And you're communicating it with the entire team. So every piece of the puzzle knows what the expectations are. The second thing is that as the superintendent, you are the owner, you are the end user. What you say has a lot of weight and merit. Okay. You have to be actively engaged. You need to be on property during construction hours. You need to have representatives there that know what's going on. If you have to go off to something, which, look, we're all trying to find work life balance, but during construction, I can't tell you how important it is that you really need to be boots on the ground. Um, and the other thing I see is that it it should never feel like us versus them. Okay. Your team should be in place where you are feeling like you're working together and that you don't have to stand over top of somebody to make sure they're doing it the way you want them to do it. If it's that situation, you need to actively participate and show somebody what your expectation is, not stand over them and demand that they do it a certain way. That's a huge pitfall I've seen of guys feeling like they're working in a prison yard versus working as a team. I can't stress that enough. Even if something goes poorly, you got to find a way to manage it in a positive way that builds that teamwork.
Yeah, it's really good. Like Greg, from your perspective, obviously, the contractor sometimes can be the team that gets beat on the most. You know what I mean? Like, what does that look like for you guys from a construction standpoint? Like, if you take some of your projects that have been to, like you're like, wow, that was an awesome project. What makes that a great project from your perspective?
Well, I think, one of your first questions, and Andrew brings up, and Mike brought off team, is, when we're looking at any project, as much as the superintendent or the club are looking at us and our history and what we're like as a company, we're looking at the club as well. And I think there's a lot of times where we've walked away from projects that weren't necessarily the right fit for us as a company. And, the word team has come across a lot in this talk, and we're looking for a relationship with any of our clients, and we're not looking for to come in and do one project and leave. We're looking to do multiple projects with all of our customers. And I think at the end of the day, if you approach it like that and you approach every project where you're looking to collaborate with everybody and you're looking to be a team, I think it definitely helps. Um, we don't look at a guy like Mike as a customer. We look at Mike as someone we're working along with. And I think you step on a place like Oakmont, and there's you can be easily intimidated. But I think Mike will tell you our guys work just hand in hand with their guys. And as much as Mike and his guys wanted to be involved, there were certain aspects where we had to say, hey Mike, just let us handle this portion of it. But it was just be able to have that conversation and just, it's a lot of give and take in a project. There's a lot of stuff where, they'll ask us to do a little extra, we'll do a little more here, we'll do a little less there. But it's truly teamwork. We all have to be rowing the boat in the same direction. It's not all pretty every day. Stuff happens. It's how you address the issues and don't run away from it. No one's there to get any feelings hurt, but you got to deal with stuff every day. So, Andrew hit the nail on the head about the superintendent's involvement. Some of the best projects are when a superintendent is involved and understands and asks questions. And if he doesn't necessarily know the answer or doesn't know what he wants, can kind of defer to either the architect or the contractors. Listen, at the end of the day, we're going to build what Andrew designs and we're leaving. And the superintendent can make either Andrew or us look really good or really, really bad. So, we need to have that relationship where we could build, Andrew could design the best golf course, we could build it. But at the end of the day, if the superintendent doesn't manage it and grow it in, it doesn't matter what we've done.
Yeah.
So, that relationship really needs to be a cohesive one.
I
Okay.
think
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I think something that's really worked well for me, any project I've ever worked with, is set a daily meeting, like first thing before the contractors roll in. Like you get the construction foreman, irrigation foreman, the shapers if they're there, the architect if they're there, and you sit down for whatever. It might be 10, 15 minutes. Okay, these are the goals for today. Like this is where we're working. If you have to make any audibles along the way, you're all there together. And like I think that's how you keep a project organized too. Like seen so many projects just get like all over the place with like traffic, haul roads coming in and out. But when you sit in a room and you have a map in front of you with the construction drawings and like guys, like this is how we're getting into this bunker and this is how we're getting out, and like everyone's on the same page every single day. That's great. And then I also love any opportunities, like especially when the architect's in, if you can get whatever it is, your grounds chair, your club president, your owner out in the field and get them right in front of the architect so they're hearing it from the cat's mouth rather than you being the middleman and trying to play architect and explain the architectural rationale for why a decision is made. Like that's a great thing too.
Yeah, and I think you kind of beat me to the punch on a little bit of that, Mike, too. Like during construction, right? The members are the customers, and what's the role of the, like membership owner? How do you communicate progress, methodologies for communicating projects? Like
Hmm.
when you're in the middle of it, what's hitting the fan, like how
Yeah.
are you getting out to them? People, they always want to know what's going on.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different buckets there. I think there's certain individuals amongst club leadership that require a very, very detailed level of information. So for me, like at Oakmont, it was my grounds chair, right? So like I was on the phone or he was in the field every single day. So he had like daily updates, exactly what we were doing. He was aware of like the specs, how we were building things. Like, and more importantly, he was the guy that I was communicating where we were at, like timeline wise and budget wise. So for us at Oakmont, and I had never really like done these before, but I get introduced, like he was a big fan of Gantt charts, right? Putting together Gantt charts with that showed progress, estimated completion dates, where we're at budget wise, like, and he ate that up. But like at the end of the day, he was the only person that saw that information. But I knew if I could make my grounds chair feel comfortable, that meant the committee was comfortable, the board was comfortable, and the entire membership. And then I think in a second bucket, you have the general membership where you're almost trying to just build enthusiasm. And I think there's various ways of doing that where at Oakmont, we hired a local media team and they came in every other week and shot videos. They got interviews from the architect, me, the golf pro. They shot, drone shots. That's common now, but like members loved the videos. And it was really cool on the back end to be able to piecemeal all that together and almost make like a documentary of the entire effort. We did written reports as well along the way. And then for us, like we were open while we did the work. So another part of my job was to put together a one-page document every day that we could hand out on the first tee and say, this area on this hole is ground under repair, and tees are up on this hole. So like any member who was going out to play knew exactly what was going on, and there was no surprises at any given point. That's
Yeah,
always
that's
like the MO.
yeah,
No
no, which is
surprises.
good. Andrew, just one other thing, and like been a part of some projects where you're always probably going to deal with this to some degree, but you know, the members that like to play architect, they all want to be Andrew Green. Like, who doesn't want to be Andrew Green for one? But like, what, how do you specifically deal with that? You know what I mean? Like guys that start picking apart what's happening out on the golf course.
Yeah, I think design by committee is can be dangerous, but
Hmm.
certainly if there are opportunities where you can get them out in the field, like Mike said, and let them see and touch the dirt, and if they offer something that moves the needle in the right direction, you try to embrace it. And if it's on the fringe of what you feel is best as the architect, you just got to find a way to gently let them down. But being Andrew Green sometimes sounds better than it is there, bud.
Yeah, for sure. I get it. So, Mike, talking about from a superintendent standpoint, in the middle of it, you talked about managing, the morning meetings between the team, when the architect comes on, but like there is a lot of like back end aspects for superintendents, like if you have to procure materials, material testing,
Yep.
like you have an assistant that's managing the irrigation, another guy that's doing greens construction, like how do you facilitate that and how do you manage your time and what's the most important, like guys that are sitting in the seat and they have all this stuff going down, like what was your philosophy as far as managing that and how did you do it every day?
Yeah, so I think first of all, any project I've ever worked on, whether it was 3 months, 9 months, a year, they fly by, right? And you're running on adrenaline through the entire process. So I think we've always tried to get like way out ahead, right? So like going into the project in 23, we had we had between 30 and 40% of our mix, our gravel, our bunker sand on site months before the project started. And part of that was because at the time, material availability was still up in the air with COVID. That was on the back end of COVID. So that was one of the reasons. But getting all that material on site and in advance allowed us to like just practice our testing mechanisms, and you start assigning roles for everyone in your staff. Like we had a guy that all he did was pull tests every day, mix gravel, bunker sand, send them out to the lab, get a procedure in place for that. And it's something that like I didn't even have to think about. I'm just looking at the results when they come in. Irrigation, like another huge thing. Like your designer might be there once a week, but you have another guy who's just on top of that and double checking, even like decoder head numbers. Like our installer, like they tracked them, we tracked them as well. I had another guy that Total Turf did GPS work for everything they installed. We bought our own GPS unit and we did the same exact thing. A, to make sure that, Greg Hufner wasn't inflating numbers, which he never did, but B,
Mhm.
like just as a backup to have that. Um, and then lastly, like I always think it's great, and I've always had to be like our lead assistant, but you just have a point man who's like, I don't think the superintendent needs to be involved in like every single little nitty gritty decision that gets made on a daily basis, but having someone who's just available at any given minute of the day to check in with the contractor and the foreman is huge. And even things like, like lesson number one, like whoever's doing that, any like stick of pipes that are going in the ground, like in a green, just looking at them and making sure they're perf pipe and not solid pipe. Like
Yeah.
can't tell you how many times like when you're putting in hundreds and hundreds of sticks of pipe, it's really easy to make a mistake like that. So I think just dividing and conquering, and I think another thing I didn't touch on earlier, and I'm ranting here, but I think as you build that team and you're working through these projects, you identify just things like Greg said, like there's things that you can help push the project along in-house. Like our team laid acres of sod around green surrounds and T surrounds, like not very technical work. We weren't, you know, we weren't like installing the mix in the greens or like laying the green sod. So I think like finding ways you can help push the timeline along in-house, that has great benefits as well.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a team approach for sure. So, along those lines, like Greg, this is kind of a question for you, is that every project I think has its like issues that come up midstream. Like what do you find like in your side of it, like the issues that come up mid-construction? How do you avoid those things derailing a project, so to speak? You know what I mean? Like you hit that 48-inch terracotta line that's going across the fairway that nobody knew about, and it changes Andrew's perspective. Like, how do you go about handling that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, when you're dealing with old golf courses, when you're dealing with old properties, you never know what you're going to hit. You're inevitably going to hit something. It's all about communication. It's all about dealing with it. It's all about just bringing it to everybody's attention. It's not the easiest thing. It's not, uh, the funnest thing to deal with, but it's not like you're just going to bury it and walk away from it. I mean, it's going to have an effect on something. Um, there's a lot of times where we go into a golf course that's already been renovated and you run into an old berry pit, or you run into, oh yeah, the old clubhouse was here, and you run into a foundation or something like that that's unexpected. I mean, it happens. You know, as much as you plan a project, and as much as you think what's in the ground, you're never going to know until you put a shovel in it. And it's just dealing with it right there. It's just, like Mike mentioned, your weekly meetings. I mean, I'm communicating and we're communicating with the club every day. We're communicating with Andrew every day. If something like that comes up and Andrew's not on site, I mean, that's a phone call. That's a, hey, you wanted to put 17 green here. It's not going to work. And it's just, you talk through it, you talk it out. You know, Master plans and golf course architecture plans are look nice on a piece of paper, but not everything. It's not engineered. Not everything gets put in the exact same spot. I'd like to say it does, but it doesn't. Stuff gets tweaked all the time. So, you just deal with it, um, and just move on. You don't dwell on it. A lot of times it's just part of the job.
Yeah, Andrew, from your perspective, and again, this kind of glides right into another point is that the unforeseen factors that affect the bottom line of a project, right? The monetary aspect is one of a big portion of it. I mean, weather, right? I mean, you get a month of shitty weather in August, it's really going to dictate how the project goes forward. When you start seeing those deltas in the bottom line of a construction project, like how do you guys handle that? How do you communicate it? How would you, recommend a superintendent approaches that? Because it could mean maybe certain portions of the project don't get done. You were planning on three back tees. Maybe they don't get, I mean, like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first thing we try to do is on the front end, try to have a contingency built into our budget. So when you add up all the numbers, all the materials, all the unit costs, Greg's costs, sod, irrigation, all those things, at the bottom line, go ahead and add some sort of contingency, which is a fund that the club understands may be an issue. You may need that money to do something that's unforeseen, but at least it gives you a layer of protection in your overall scheme and your overall budget. So that's an important part on the front end. During a project, you have three things that you're working on. It's a three-legged stool we talked about. It's schedule, it's cost, and it's quality. And you really want all three of those to be as firm as possible. And when you start talking about giving up one of them, you're never going to give up quality. So if you need a shorter amount of time, um, and you want to keep the same quality, sometimes it costs more, those kinds of things. So there's some balance to that. If you get in a project and you have to make a hard decision, I'm always trying to figure out, how do we get what we're doing done right? And if there's something that can wait to a later date down the road, another phase, a back tee, whatever, how do we do it so that we don't have to spend that money somehow twice to finish it down the road, and just try to make really smart decisions? And sometimes something comes up that is unforeseen and outside of contingency, or you have to make a decision. What you need is, you need to call your contractor like Greg and say, hey, listen, we found this issue. Give us a price of what it's going to take to address it, whatever that is. And let's put it in front of the decision makers and have, a detailed conversation about it. I think, superintendents trying to kind of go behind, not necessarily behind back, but just kind of going out on their own, trying to solve some of these issues. That's a real risk. Let me as the architect be a potential delivery person of that message, and let's sit down and talk about it together and find out what the best solution is. And look, stuff happens. There's no doubt. But the more you can plan on the front end of that contingency, the better you're going to be. Last thing on that is, if you do have a contingency, often I think about, at the end of the project, if we haven't used it for something unforeseen, it potentially allows you to do other things, maybe have more money for sod, more money for grow in, hire an extra guy. There's other potential benefits of having that in the planning stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really, really important to understand that fact of that contingency. Like along the same lines, like how flexible do you need to be with your design during a construction process? Like,
Never. No, it's what I want. Highway, my highway. No,
yeah.
no, absolutely not. The architect should really understand that golf is not like building a bridge that's connecting to abutments. Golf can be a little loosey goosey. And if you have to make adjustments to meet budget, to meet the time, to meet what's best for the project, that's one of the beautiful things about the game. And I would challenge your architects to use it as an opportunity to create an interesting, solution to the problem. I'm learning something every day. I mean, I'm out here running a bulldozer today. There's things I'm adjusting on the fly to try to make the project as good as it can be. And if we're under a budget constraint, a time constraint, and we need to find a better solution for the best overall project, that's just what you have to do.
Yeah. And like Mike, thinking about this, and let's just fast forward a little bit. You're getting towards the end of the project, or you might have some stuff opened up. Is that, I know it's one challenge that comes up for a lot of individuals, is like, you know, setting the parameters even before construction's completed, as far as like setting expectations for members, like when you're
Yeah.
going to be able to get on surfaces, like what green speeds are going to be, like I know with a lot of people that I work with on construction, if they're building new greens, like maturation point is 3 years, beyond the point when they open. Like,
Yep.
any advice you can give to some people as far as setting those expectations, maybe even talking about like limitations of the amount of play that's going to be out there in the first year, things of that nature.
Yeah, might sound cliche, but I think that's like the prime example where you under promise and try to over deliver. Um, I've made this mistake 1,000 times. You try to rush opening a newly restored area of the golf course back to the membership. You know, I've made this mistake 1,000 times. Like you get too, you have a new green, newly sodded. You get too aggressive, too fast with aerification, and you pay for that for years, right? Like anything that I've ever like disturbed in that first 6 months from like a root structure standpoint, like it's never right again.
Mhm.
So I think like just setting reasonable expectations for us at Oakmont, like we we did 24,000 square feet of green expansions and didn't touch the interiors. And when we opened up those new greens, like we kept whole locations like way away from the expansions for a pretty extended period of time. And that allowed members to still experience the new features without actually like specifically playing on those surfaces. So I think it's important to set realistic expectations to make sure people know that like there is a maturation process. Playability might not be exactly the same right out the gate as untouched portions of the golf course. Um, and then oftentimes it gives you the ability, like especially if you have the right weather, where you can open up things earlier than you communicated, and playability is better than people really expected, and then you look like an all-star.
Yeah. Andrew, how about you? I mean, what's your approach? Because I think that's a question that so many superintendents face because let's face it, if your golf course is closed for say 8 months, 6 months, or whatever that time frame might be, is that I mean, people pay to play golf there. I mean, when it all boils down to it, they're not there to get a good steak, right? They want to play golf. They love it. And there's a lot of pressure on the superintendent, and the contractor and the architect as well. But like, when's it going to open? What are the expectations? What do you see are successful approaches?
Yeah, I think if you can get the the buy-in to have it, be open when it's ready, that's like the best message because it doesn't put an exact timeline. It's we're going to open it when it's ready. That should be kind of an early mantra. Certainly, as you get closer, people are going to want to know some sort of date, so you're going to have to get there at some point. But yeah, undersell, overachieve. Yeah, certainly anything you can do there is important. I think when we talk about setting expectations, it's that when we open the golf course, everybody's going to be excited to play it. That should be the excitement factor. The factor of enjoying the final product is down the road for sure. And so anything you can, explain or communicate that, hey, yeah, we're going to open it. It's ready. We're going to open it, but it's really not going to achieve exactly what we're looking for until the end of next season or whatever you feel is right based on the amount of work. And the more you can communicate that to your golf professional and your general manager, the better. A lot of times, superintendents and golf professionals, there's some like Tom and Jerry. Sometimes they don't get along great. Hopefully, you do. But the more that the person that's interacting with the golfer on a daily basis understands what you're going through and setting that expectation, and you're able to communicate what you're doing and what's out in front, the better you're going to be. And certainly limiting play also goes back to those other two partners in that senior leadership team, the general manager having to convey the message to the club leadership, and then the golf professional having to convey it to the members. Typically, we like 100 rounds a day, plus or minus, when we open a project. I really love to limit cart rounds almost to none if we can. Sometimes that's unrealistic, but starting small and working into it is important. The last thing you want to do is open this new great thing and it get destroyed, since when there's no way it's going to be absolutely mature that first day.
Yeah, and I don't want to ask Mike this question because he's got deep pockets over there, but the question that keeps coming up, that I hear all the time, and how do you deal with the lost revenue aspect? I mean, that seems to be a hot button topic where it comes up at every club, like how to deal with that lost revenue aspect.
Yeah, I think
I wasn't asking you, Mike. I know you got deep pockets. I was asking
oh,
Andrew.
Oh, I thought you said Mike.
So sorry about that. That was probably,
What was the question again, Cork? Sorry.
So like lost revenue, like how do
Lost
you deal
revenue.
with
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
I got it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, each club operates a little differently. So certainly, it's going to be up to the finance committee, general manager, CFO, however the club's set up to help understand that. We've done some things where we do like the practice facility as a first phase or a last phase so that it stays open while we're doing a project. I'm not a huge advocate of doing projects in bits and pieces, but if your revenue stream depends on that, then absolutely you're going to have to find a way to pay for the project. When it comes to financing completely, I love having a member communicate that more than a consultant because the member tends to, they're also writing a check or whatever, allowing them to help communicate that dynamic, I think is huge. So just a pointer on that. From a lost revenue standpoint, I mean, some of it is just, it is what it is. You're not going to be able to play golf. So The things we've looked at is, what happens on the back end with the revenue stream. If you're creating a better product, are you raising your rates? Are you raising initiation fees? What are you going to do on the backside to end up paying that off from the front end?
Yeah, no, that's good. Um, Greg, just taking a look overall, I think some interesting points and is like, like last 10 or 15 years, like, what's changed in construction and, the way that construction takes place. And like, have you seen that's really moved the needle forward on a lot of the construction processes?
I mean, obviously, technology, just like in anything in the world, is we're using a lot more technology in golf course construction than I think anybody ever thought we would. From GPS to total station to topo drones now. I mean, um, we track everything on our projects with GPS. So every day, our project managers, assistant project managers are GPSing pipe that goes in the ground, square foot of bunkers, square foot of greens, disturbance, anything. And we have a pretty sophisticated tracking system that our guys are responsible for putting together every day, and that basically generates our billing every 2 weeks. And um, you know, to get back to point earlier is how do you stay on budget? I mean, we bill every 2 weeks on most jobs, and we could tell you at any time where we're at any moment on a project. And those are some of the things that 10 years ago you never had. And you know we with Andrew specifically and a lot of architects, he mocks up his greens as the finished grade, and we use a total station to scan them and build them, and it makes us so much more efficient to build greens. And that way he can build the green to exactly the way he wants it, and our guys will just scan it, build it back up, and there's no questions to whether that knob was like that or that hump was like that. I mean, it just makes us so much more efficient on the back end, that you never had that in 10 years ago, 15 years ago. um, so I would say technology, obviously equipment advances. We're using some of the most state of the art equipment when it comes to excavators and haulers and stuff like that. But those are some of the biggest things.
Yeah. So, along those lines, Andrew, inflationary costs pre-COVID versus post-COVID, like I know there's a lot of people that have shock on construction. Like, how has that changed, like the inflationary numbers?
Yeah, it's been really hard to overcome. Used to be able to put an irrigation system in for $1.5 million. You get a pretty good system, and now that's $4 million. And not that I'm beating on the irrigation, but it just shows you the the advancement of the total cost. And not only is it inflationary things, it's also just that everybody's busy. That certainly puts some stress on pricing. Um, because we're working so far in advance, where we're projecting projects 2, 3 years down the road, then it's hard for me to ask Greg to give me a number to build something that's 3 years down the road. One of the things we're doing for that is we're monitoring the CPI. So it's a consumer price index by the government. It's a great kind of non-emotional way to track inflationary dynamics. Yes, it's not specific exactly to golf, but it's something that we've tried to do is saying, hey, we want you to bid this as if you're building it in November of 2026, but we're
Yeah.
not going to build it until November of 2028. So the CPI difference between 26 and 28, that'll be part of the factor in how we pay the contractor 2 years in advance. You could also potentially negotiate that with your different building partners. But that's one of the ways we've tried to at least wrap our head around it. Um, and then just trying to be as smart as you can with the budget to try to stretch a dollar. Some of that comes to establishment, seeding versus sod or sprigging versus sod. You can stretch money, but it also puts more stress on the maintenance team to be able to grow those things in. And it also potentially takes more time, which means the golf course is down longer. So as you're thinking about how to stretch your budget, you just have to factor in those other things other than just the dollars.
Yeah, no, I think those are really good points. And, Mike, circling back to you, kind of getting towards the end here, because I know we're at about an hour and 15 minutes, but like, what type of advice would you bring to a superintendent that's, either about ready to embark on a project or in the pre-planning stages? What would you say if you were to give some overall advice?
I think number one, build as much enthusiasm towards the project as you possibly can through whatever measure it needs to be, whether it's through the architect, whether it's through yourself, whether it's through certain club leaders that really like spearhead the kind of like marketing pitch. But I think Andrew touched on it earlier. Just doing things the right way. I've I've made the mistake in my career of like, okay, we're going to try to do like $1.5 million of work worth of work for 1 million, and we're going to do a bunch of stuff in-house, and like that catches up to you 100% of the time. And I remember like my first year at Applebaum is, part of the project, we were going to do like 10 acres of fairway expansions. And at the time I walked in there, I was like, oh man, there's a lot of POA in the rough. Like, I'll just scalp this rough down to fairway height, and like that's how we'll expand these fairways. And over the first few years, they look great, but like as everything else evolved and developed on the golf course, like after several years, like those fairway expansions stuck out like a sore thumb, and then it became like, how can we kill out the ryegrass and the Kentucky bluegrass? And like if we had just done it the right way right out the gate, whether we seeded or sodded or whatever it was, we wouldn't have had those issues. So like identify like what the max potential that the club is willing to spend, try to get as much work done as you possibly can for that number, being as efficiently as possible, but don't be unrealistic with what you're trying to get done for the funds that you do have available.
Yeah, that's really good. Greg, how about from your perspective? Same question.
I just think you have to make sure you educate yourself. You have to, just make sure you're prepared. Do whatever you can to, you know, make sure you're ahead of the curve. Um, you know, uh, One thing that I think guys miss the mark on is that they go into a project and you know you have members of a committee or members of a club that have certain things that we're going to do this when we get in there, we're going to do that when we get in there, and there's not really a realistic scope or expectation of what the project's going to bring. And I think you have a bunch of people in the background that are just noise, and everybody has their wish list. I think if you go in with a clearly defined scope in a project, and you have leadership that's a dictatorship's not a bad thing when you come to a golf course construction project. When there's one voice, it makes it a lot easier. But from a superintendent standpoint, you just educate yourself. Um, if you're trying to sell a project, make it about what the golf course needs, not about what you want. It makes it a lot easier to ask and show them what you need rather than what your wish list is, and you can get your wish list along the way. And I think you're hiring experts. Andrew, I'll call myself an expert, but use those guys as an advocate. There's a lot of times where they look at, you can tell them till you're blue in the face, but they don't listen to you to listen to somebody else. We're there to help you guys at the end of the day. And, there's a lot of times where I get into situations where a superintendent will pull me aside and say, hey, you know, I've been telling them that we need to do X, Y, and Z, and they won't listen to me. Can you help me? And, I have no problem doing that. And I'm sure Andrew doesn't either. But, you know, if you don't ask, you're never going to know. But I think just preparing yourself, um, I think is the best thing. And don't be afraid to ask questions. I feel like a lot of times, when I was a superintendent coming up, you get that job and you're always afraid to let somebody know that you don't know potentially what you're doing. And I think sometimes it hurts you. But I think if that's the big thing, I would recommend to just try to prepare yourself as far in advance as possible.
Okay. All right. Last question before we'll get to some questions, and I'll turn it over to Ryan. Andrew, like if you had to identify a couple things that, like maybe projects you've been associated with that you wish you, maybe not from architecture, just in general scope of the project that you could avoid. What are some pitfalls if you're going to say to talk to a golf course superintendent? What stuff can they either do ahead of time to avoid certain aspects? The just kind of avoiding big level issues.
Yeah. Um, I think the number one thing is being actively engaged during the project. It's not a turnkey thing. It's not you're paying for this and when you're done, you take ownership of it. It's being there right beside me, right beside your building partner the entire way. I know that maybe sounds foreign to some people, but you'd be surprised. I mean, I've done site visits and I've never seen the superintendent. That's just not ideal for me. I want the superintendent right beside me. So as I'm adjusting a grassing line, I can say, do you think you can mow that turning radius? Okay, great. If not, let's adjust it. So being engaged so that you're not ending up at the end of the day with something you can't maintain or you can't deal with in any other way. The next is not only should your team be well prepared, but your equipment should be well prepared. So getting all the junk out of your shop, getting things straight and tidy, getting room to operate for a project, because not only do you have your daily stuff as you're growing it in, you got all this other stuff you got to deal with. So get that ready. Make sure you have the manpower and make sure you have the right tools. And then if you don't, you either have to go ask for it or you got to tell the architect, I don't have the right assets to maintain this. And it's not that you're trying to damper greatness. It's just that no matter what I design, if you can't maintain it, it's pointless. So you really, that engagement should be from day one. And as Greg said, you shouldn't be afraid of asking questions. And as I said early on, at the end of the day, you're the owner. It's you're really taking a lot of ownership and pride in this. Just be right there with us along the way. That's the greatest thing, and also the biggest pitfall I've seen.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, Andrew, like I told you 4 times I couldn't mow the bunker face on 12 East. You still built it anyways, my
Oh,
friend.
hold on. That's also the guy that brought the mower out the day we laid grass, and just to prove to me it's
Yeah.
good.
So good stuff, fellas. I mean, really appreciate your guys' time. I know Ryan's going to open it up to some questions, but can't thank you guys enough. Obviously, in Quali Pro, just I wish we had 4 hours because I know we could talk about a bunch of different other stuff. But thank you guys for the information you guys imparted to everybody. Appreciate you guys being here. So I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Yeah, I second that. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Mike, Andrew, and Greg. Great conversation, and just super grateful for your time, and I'm sure all of the attendees are as well. So, thank you. And I say we can probably do questions for about 10 minutes or so. We do have two in the queue right now. First from Connor, addressed to Andrew and Greg. Have you ever walked away from a project because of negative interactions with memberships or internal leadership teams?
Yeah, I would tell you one quick red flag for me is that if the superintendent isn't on an initial phone call with me, it's a red flag. I'm going the other direction because no matter what I do, if I don't have that partner in the cart beside me or walking down that fairway with me, it's bad news.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, just like when we meet clubs for the first time or when we're going through the process of contractor selection, just as much as they're trying to learn about us, we're trying to learn about them. And there's been numerous times where we've taken our name out of the equation for projects just because we didn't feel like it was the right fit for us as a company. So, yes.
Great. Thank you. From Dustin, if adding a contingency line item, is there a recommended percent based off total budget number?
Yeah, I guess I'll take this stab at it, and then everybody can fill in. The way I usually think about it is when I'm out a long ways from the project. So in the early initial stages, I might have 10% or maybe even 15% contingency. As I start to gather more information, I'll start to drop that. And so once I understand like what's the erosion control, going to look like because I have the permitted set of plans. That's not an unknown. Now that's kind of a known. So I don't need as much cushion to make up for something like that. So I think 10 to 15 at the onset, depending on the size of the project. And then as you get closer, I think I would not want to go into a project with less than 2.5%. 5% is kind of standard. But again, it depends, 2.5% on $10 million versus 2.5% on a million dollars. Obviously, that makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean the size and the scope of the project, like Andrew said, makes a difference. And as dialed in as you can with the spec and how much you have in approvals, like Andrew mentioned, is key because there's a lot of times where we get projects to bid and not everything's approved yet, whether it's the erosion control, whether it's the earthwork plan, that there's a lot of variables and unknowns. But 2.5, 5%, somewhere in there. There's some upwards of 10. I would say from 5 to 10% is what we typically see on ours.
I would agree.
Okay, special instructions question from Dave Del Sangro from Agronomic Advisors, a disgruntled Steelers fan. Andrew, he wants to know what the worst part of working for Jeff Corcoran was.
Uh, Trying to keep up with him. The guy's on the move. He's constantly in motion. So you better keep up if you want
Be
to know what's
careful.
going on.
Be careful, Andrew. Be careful.
See, I thought that was the nicest thing I could say. Come on.
That's it. That's pretty
That's
good.
a good answer. That's a good answer. Okay, from Brian, what are some bunker liners that are gopher proof? The bunkers at my course were redone 10 years ago and have been turned over and contaminated by gophers.
Yeah, animals are probably the hardest thing to deal with. I mean, even the hardliners can be a real struggle. Um, but I guess I'd have to lean towards something in that Capcom Better Billy, whatever hardliner to try. But I'm not even sure that's going to deal with it. As an intern, we used to have a contest every week for a case of beer of who killed the most gophers or moles. So maybe that's a way to go about it. Sorry.
And then also from Brian, um, approved to level tee boxes in-house, doesn't have the crew to do it. Option one, rotor tilt tee boxes, level with sand, reseed, or Craigslist rebuild by top dressing tees till level.
Yeah. Uh, Sorry. My best advice on that is buy a single plane laser off of Amazon and a rod and get out there and try to do the best you can with a rake and shovels. But it's going to be tough. And I think recording how you do it so that you can show whoever you're answering to that this is how painful it is to try to get a level tee box. That's one way I've gone about it. I don't know, Greg or Mike.
Yeah, I mean, without knowing how bad they are, it's tough to give you an answer. Um, but yeah, trying to do them yourself in those methods is going to be pretty tough.
From Tyler Bloom to Andrew and Greg, what's the first step for individuals that want to pursue a career in golf course construction?
Don't be afraid to get dirty.
Yeah. We have an internship program here at our company. Um, it's you got to start somewhere. Like Andrew said, you're not going to come in much like a golf course position. You're not going to come in a management position. You got to work your way up. The one thing I'll tell you is we've got guys that have been with our company for 30 plus years, and these guys will teach you everything you need to know. You just got to come in with a desire and a willingness to learn and work alongside of them. And they'll teach you anything. So there's a lot of opportunity in the golf course construction business. Um, it's busy. Everybody's looking for good young guys or good people. So there is tons of opportunity if you're looking for it.
We have a question from Nate wondering if the golf business is booming overseas as much as it is in the States.
Yeah, I mean, we get probably overseas inquiry at least once a month or so. So certainly it is. Um, I think just the market in the United States is on fire, not only so much because of the post-COVID golfing boom, but because so many golf courses in the US were built between 1980 and 2000, whatever, 2008. And so a lot of them are 20, 30, 40 years old, and they've been sitting on the sidelines. And pretty much every 30 to 40 years, most of the components on a golf course start to really fail. And so that reinvestment has to happen.
We don't go outside the continental United States, so that would be more of a question for Andrew. There's plenty of work for us in the United States.
And do you have any indication as to when the boom could end or begin declining?
I'd love another 15 years if you can get it for me, but yeah, I don't know. It certainly isn't slowing down at the moment. The cost pressures on the game of golf and on golf construction certainly are a bit of a weight around this boom's neck, but we continue to see courses want to reinvest. And again, I think it's in large part because so much golf work was kind of delayed somewhere in that 2008 range. So even courses that weren't touched, say between 2005 and 2025, now that next 10 years, there are going to be a lot of things that are, up for renewal that are going to, continue this.
I mean, from our standpoint, like I mentioned earlier, we're booked 2 years out. We're looking at stuff for 2028 and even 2029 now, which is hard to even imagine. Um, One, I think, key indicator for us is new course construction. And, right now we're building 3 new golf courses and we have 4 new golf courses on the books for later in 26 and 27. Um, when golf really slowed down, those were zero. So I think from a health standpoint, from a golf course renovation and construction, I think it's pretty good. And the one thing I'll add to that is different parts of the country, if it were to slow down, it doesn't all slow down at once. There's so many golf courses in, take Florida, for example, it kind of phases its way in. Um, so it's a little different in the golf business than I think it is from a economic standpoint throughout the country from just a general point of view.
Question from Kyle in the Q&A. Can Jeff and or Mike discuss the maturation of turf and mistakes or learning process of the first 18 months on establishing greens, grow in, texture, etc.?
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think I touched on it earlier, but I think one mistake I've really made is, especially when it comes to like green expansions, new greens that are sodded. Like I've always had this like natural inclination, like I want to go out, I want to pull cores, I want to like push roots, promote root density, and end up like loosening up the sod, and it's not right for like years. And then on the flip side, you think back and you're like, okay, like organic percentages in a newly constructed green that was sodded are a fraction of what everything else is. Like, why do you need to do those things? So I struggle with this, but I always just try to like back off, like just do everything slower. Like if you're making fertility applications, like dial everything back, make more frequent applications at lower rates, because I think new grass is a lot more reactive to inputs than something that's been sitting there for generations. And I think, from like a texture standpoint, that's another mistake I've made, like trying to push texture, start going out and doing things like brushing and grooming and verticutting, and all of a sudden, like you're putting all this abrasion on this brand new turf. And again, like that turf is going to be so much less um, tolerant of those aggressive maintenance procedures. So again, it's cliche, but like less is more, and just ease into things and let the grass tell you when it's ready to push.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on top of that from a standpoint that is less is more is definitely the approach to take. I think that when we did the renovation with Andrew in 2019, came out a little too hard right off the bat. And if you were going to go generalizations, is that if you're rebuilding greens, brand new construction, I think it's a full 3 year maturation process. First year is going to be, you know, the level of expectation from your membership should be relatively low. Second year, number two, it's going to be better. Third year, you should be starting to hit your stride as far as what you're trying to do from a performance standpoint. And one small cautionary tale is just make sure your mower setup is good. I've seen more dead grass caused by bad mower setup than anything else.
I think the other important thing to realize is like when you open up like whether it's a new build, new restoration, like the membership's going to be so excited to be out there playing that new golf course. They're going to be a lot less like clued in and dialed in and cognizant of like playability. And I think like there's a big difference between like if you can pull back, like increase mowing heights a little bit, maybe you have 6 to a foot less of ball roll on your greens. Like people aren't going to notice those things. Maybe a couple of years down the line, once they start getting used to that new work, they'll be more tuned into that. But you have a little bit more leeway with that right out the gate. You get this shiny new thing.
Okay, we have two more. We'll probably cap it at that just due to time. So, Sean first, who is your preferred old school architect to work on?
I guess that's to me.
Probably.
Yeah. Well, certainly we've done a lot of Ross work and really enjoy that. I think William Flynn speaks to me a lot, just the way he came to the game and what he thought about the game. So between those two, we've enjoyed working on some Tillinghast stuff. Certainly McKenzie had a lot of influence on me. And I would say George Thomas, I've only worked on one of his courses thus far, but another great one. So I struggled answering that with just one.
Very good. And then lastly, Jocelyn, what is the process of landing a course to renovate to breaking ground to playing around? Ideally, what is the time frame to be up and running again?
Yeah, I guess I'll try my best at that and let the others fill in. So, typically it's about a year of master planning or kind of big vision planning of design. And then it's about a 2 year process from there to in the ground. So typically from start to finish is roughly three. It can be done faster, but the typical is about a 3 year window for us.
I would agree with that timeline. The only thing I'd add is um, if you are touching any type of body of water or any type of stuff, wetlands or stuff like that, you might have to give yourself a little more time in the beginning. Getting those permits and stuff like that is going to add a lot more time in the beginning.
Awesome. Well, great questions, everybody. Again, thank you for your engagement and participation. And one last big thank you to our panelists today. Really appreciate your time. This will be recorded and posted just as our first session was. And so we look forward to seeing you all again as we continue this on a monthly basis. So thank you all again.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
guys.